Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to the AI for Good panel. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. My name is Harrison Marks. I'm here with Jake Porway and Shannon Beckham. And we are excited to chat with you guys for the next 40 minutes. So AI has been top of mind for, feels like the entire world for the last 2 years. But less of a focus has been how AI can impact the public sector. And in particular, what we're all here to talk about is how AI can impact municipalities and cities. There's the potential for AI to fundamentally transform the way that cities serve their residents and ideally improve the residents' lives and the lives of city workers. But that's only if it's deployed ethically, socially consciously, and with a mindset towards public benefit. So we are here today, each of us coming from different perspectives to talk about exactly that. Again, my name is Harrison Marks. I'm an investor. We've got Jake, who is an advisor to nonprofits, philanthropies, and cities. And then we have Shannon, who is an entrepreneur with an AI company that serves municipalities and public sector leaders. So each of us has thought a lot about these issues that we'll be talking about today, coming from a different perspective. My background is that I am an investor at Commonweal Ventures, and we invest in companies solving problems that matter for America, and have done a bunch of investing in companies that are serving cities, serving public safety agencies, serving municipal agencies, and so my background here is as an investor. I'll hand it over to Jake and Shannon in a second, but the goal here today is to demystify what it is that AI can do when it comes to municipalities, talk about real use cases, make this feel tangible and real for all of you who I know work in and alongside cities. And so we'll spend the first portion of this panel talking with one another, and then we'll open it up for questions. So please start thinking of questions that you have for us as we get going. But first, I will kick it over to Shannon. And Shannon, please, would love to hear your background and where you're coming from.
Great. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here today. Just so we get a sense of who's here, who here works with government, like is working in the government? Great. And who here works in the private sector but is serving government or interacting with cities? Okay, super helpful, about a mix of us. That is great as we tailor this conversation. My background, I'm the founder and CEO of Chief AI, and I started my career in government. So I was in the White House, I was in Congress, on campaigns, and was constantly serving and working with government leaders. And one of the problems we always faced was that so much of our work was manual. We were doing admin all the time. We had no access to updated modern technology. The tech that we did have were legacy systems built 20 years ago. And I just kept thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way to serve the American people. There has to be a better way to run these offices. So I went to work for technology leaders, and I was working for Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, across his AI initiatives. And even while I was working for him on AI, what I found was actually managing his office and his priorities was still entirely manual. So he had a chief of staff, he had a scheduling team, different advisors, and everything we were doing to drive toward his priorities was still pretty manual. I went to business school to explore this space. How can I bring AI back into the public sector? And one of the things I found is that there is no software built to manage an executive. And in government, so many of the offices, whether you're a mayor or a governor or a city manager, any of these leaders, the office is built around the priorities of that leader. So that's what we've built with Chief AI. We started last year and launched publicly last month. And we are working primarily with cities and states, with the mayors and governors, to help them manage their time, their relationships, and their priorities. And it is one of the first software platforms that allows you to actually, a leader and their team, to manage all of those things and help drive toward the priorities of the office. And I'm excited to dive into that more.
Hey, gang. Jake Porway here. Show of hands, who works in nonprofits or philanthropy? Yeah, one hand in the back. Yes, heck yeah. Raise them tall. Yeah, heck yeah. I know that's a little bit in the minority here today, but that's a little bit where I'm coming from in this city's story, in the tapestry of what makes our city work. So really briefly, I came from an AI background doing computer vision. Thought I would stay in that for a while, but then realized, man, it was so depressing that everything we were using, this incredible technology that we'd evolved to make so intelligent, use all the world's data, was figuring out what kind of Snuggie you want to buy, or targeting ads during Spotify. It was so unfulfilling. And at the same time, there are all these nonprofits and governments who had data and computation, just, starting with their iPhones all the way to what we have today, like cities installing, GPU clusters. Like, there's incredible technology opportunity if they understand how to unlock it. So that was what kind of got me into the social sector, where I first started a nonprofit called Datakind. It was like Doctors Without Borders for data scientists, right? You get people from Google and Netflix to go work with nonprofits to say, like, what could you do with your data? Or government agencies. One of our first projects was here in New York City, working with the Parks Department, just to project what were the kind of tree landscapes going to look like over time. So some statisticians from big tech companies working with them on that. And it was a blast. You saw them kind of like open up and realize what this stuff could do. So I've sort of continued that path through these waves, be it big data algorithms or now generative AI. And so a lot of my time is thinking more about those kind of public-private partnerships between nonprofits, technologists, government agencies that can work together to build technology that really actually works for citizens or for government issues. Because a lot of great stuff's going to come down from tech companies for us to use. We're going to need to learn how to use that and get more efficient. But there's always going to be certain stuff that the market just won't bear. Detecting where there are going to be fires that are going to occur, or doing translation on specific languages that only some subgroup of New York really speaks. So I'll pause there before I talk about examples in the next section, but I'll say that's the thing I care most about. How do we bring together the wonderful people across the city who know technology, know social issues, can responsibly build what a real future looks like?
Great. Thank you very much, Jake, and thank you, Shannon. So it's really easy to get caught up in generalities here. Would love to bring this back to very specific, tangible examples. And so I'll hand it over to each of you guys to just give us, with visual support, an example of what it is that you're working on or something that you've worked on, Jake.
Perfect. Okay, so I think to that point in these sessions, we've all been to a lot of these, and AI is very abstract. So we're going to show you really brief demos of what we do, and that way we can then take the discussion from there. So as I mentioned, Chief AI is software to power the world's leaders, and we work with both government leaders and business leaders. When I was in government, this is what my life felt like. And as an example, here's what it takes to schedule a single meeting for an elected official, whether you are the mayor of Denver, who we work with, or the president of the United States. It is a 12-step process. There are inboxes, Word documents. There are memos that get printed and put in binders and handed to the principal each day. So my job at Chief is to think, how can I take this process and use AI to make it far more efficient, and so that these teams can be more strategic in what they're deciding to do. It's not just about when to schedule a meeting, it's about what meetings do we schedule? How is this driving toward our priorities? How does my time align with our goals? So Chief AI is a command center where you get to manage all of these things. We start with scheduling because it's a reflection of your priorities. We then bring all of that information into a relationship database, and then we can give you insights on how you're spending your time and who you're meeting with. This is our platform. You go into your dashboard. This is an example of, we're working with the mayor of Denver, as I mentioned, so this is an example from his team. And you can see his schedule for the day, the tasks he needs to complete that day. We bring in different insights. Every scheduling request comes into a single dashboard. You'd be amazed at the backlogs of requests that cities across the country have. Hundreds and hundreds of requests that are just sitting in backlogs. And they have interns going through and trying to copy-paste them into Word documents, figure out what we should be doing with our time. We use AI to summarize and categorize these and give recommendations so you have real context. We then bring them into the briefings. And as I mentioned, a lot of people still prefer emails or Word documents. They like things printed. So we're trying to bridge that gap between how do we take something and push you forward on technology, but then also allow you to export it in whatever format you need. We can also then really create a system of record. So every interaction that you have with someone gets documented. So if you're about to meet with a constituent or a stakeholder group, you actually now have context on who that person is. The last time you met with them or the last time your team met with them. You can keep notes about how they relate to the priorities that you have and what you're doing, so you can serve them better. And then lastly, we give you insights on all of this. So across topics, across geographies, how are you spending your time and where? And then, of course, it's all AI native, so you can ask Chief any question, such as, I'm heading to New York for this trip. I need to put together a roundtable of leaders that care about smart cities. Who are the people in my network I should meet with to do that? So we're really focused on making you not only just more efficient with AI, but also more strategic. How can you make smarter decisions that help you serve your communities better?
Great. Thanks, Shannon. Jake, make it real for us.
All right, I got to ask first, how close are you to having avatars of the people? Send my avatar to that meeting. I don't want to do that.
I'll keep the human in the loop.
Okay, all right, human in the loop for now. Awesome. So I love that. It makes me think about, how much more efficient our government could be with these tools. Some of the work I do is, as mentioned, on the nonprofit side. And so I'm not going to show you like whiz-bang AI, but I want to tell you a story from a program here in the city that we're launching to help nonprofits get a little better with AI. So this is a program called Decoded Futures. It's out of the Tech NYC Foundation. So Tech NYC is this huge umbrella group of all the tech companies in New York. And their foundation focuses on how tech can be used for social good. And the basic premise is, we recognize all these nonprofits are like getting all this pressure, like, I'm supposed to use AI. Everyone's saying I got to use AI. I need to do AI to get funding. What do I do? And no one knows where to start. So Decoded Futures is that kind of one-stop shop to say, if you don't know what you need, if let's cut through the bull, put you first. We'll help you understand what could be possible. And one of our programs actually pairs folks for 8 weeks with technologists to learn a little bit about what AI could do and try to solve a problem. I'll tell you one quick story. This is from the Reading Institute. Now, if you know, in New York, our literacy rates are abysmal. I can't remember the exact numbers, but every now and then I hear that stat, like, half the city can't read at a 5th grade level. Don't quote me on that. Something, shocking. And one of the issues that the Reading Institute tackles is a lot of kids struggle. They need like these phonics books, what they call decodable books, right? So it says, look, this kid's behind. Give them a book that only has 3-letter words. Okay, now introduce the CH sound. They don't know how to do that yet. So this is really important. It should be really helpful for getting kids up the curve of reading. But the problem is these books are really hard to come by, right? So it turns out that to get these books, they cost like $3,000 a set. A lot of schools can't afford them. And more than that, a lot of reading happens at home with parents. They serve like the Bronx, the poorest district in a part of the South Bronx, one of the poorest districts. These families aren't affording $3,000 for some books, right? They're going to be not written for a specific curriculum. You got to hope that it's got the things that your kid needs. And, a kid might be sick of reading that story about a pig. I want one that represents me. I want one about aliens, right? So this group came in. They're like a team of 2. Their experience, I hope I'm not underselling it, was along the lines of, I've opened ChatGPT and had it like write a haiku. Right? It's like where a lot of people are at. After 6 weeks, they figured out they could create custom instructions for a GPT to basically say, hey, someone needs a decodable book with the following conditions. It's got to be fictional, make it about a cheetah, put CH word in it, 90% words that people have seen before. And lo and behold, they're able to come up with a whole decodable book for these kids. They emphasize the CH sound. This is what GPT came up with. Those are words that the kid has seen before. These are words they want them to test. Now, like I said, this isn't digital twins of a city. This isn't like massively like AI and hyper-techy. But the significance of this is that I asked them how many books a kid might need, a decodable book, before they're up to speed. They said, unlimited. There's no end to how much these kids need to practice. They'll never get enough. But now that they've built this, they're fundraising to say, hey, maybe we can disrupt the decodable book market, democratize access to books at exactly the personalized level people need. So I love stories like that. And the real takeaway for me is not just the product that was built, but to me, the importance of folks having these kind of sandboxes, right? Like in that program, they got to sit with somebody, I forget their exact, the volunteer they had, but we've got AI folks from Accenture or people from Google Creative Labs who can just wayfind and say, look, this is what you can do, this is what's real, this is what's hype, and get to a conclusion like that. So my take has always been for cities and the future of AI for good, more of that public-private partnership so people can just play and figure out what does work is really important.
Thank you both very much. So one of the ways that I think about how AI can improve the public good is when it comes to municipalities is either improving the way that city workers function and alleviating pain points that city workers face, and or alleviating and making lives better for the city residents. And so Jake, you've sort of spoken to the latter. Shannon, I think you focused a lot on the former, right? So I'd love to hear, as you've started building Chief AI, what are the key pain points that public sector leaders face that you think could be alleviated by AI?
Absolutely. So when you think about the pain points that public sector leaders face, you could take this question in a lot of directions, especially now. There's so many economic challenges, there are so many political challenges, everything is uncertain. And I think that leaders are really looking to figure out, how do I take the priorities that we have and find certainty, drive toward them, and then communicate that. Because one of the biggest pain points I hear across the board is that there's just a lack of trust in institutions, a lack of trust in governments. And at the federal level, this is really abstract. People feel like they don't have agency there. But at the local level, it can actually be quite tangible. It's like, I have a pothole that needs to be filled, and if my city government hears me, they will fill it. When I was first exploring this issue of where does trust break with government, I asked myself, what's your first interaction with our government? And for a lot of people, it's getting your driver's license. So I went and spent hours and hours in DMVs all over the country and talking to DMV directors to understand what are people's experiences, why haven't we been able to fix this process yet? Like, why is there no TurboTax for the DMV? Why is this so complicated? And one of the things I found is I think that it's all state by state, so certain states have actually completely rebuilt their systems. Arizona is a great example of this. They rebuilt their entire DMV system, and when you talk to people in that state now who go and actually have positive experiences, they're like, oh yeah, there are no wait times, there are no backlogs, I actually had a really positive experience, and they're pleasantly surprised, and it's like that fraction of trust that gets rebuilt with government every time these systems are built better. And so by being able to actually use AI to eliminate backlogs, to respond to constituents faster, to have services where you can be held accountable and say, I was elected to do this thing and now this service serves you better, I think that's one of the biggest areas that AI can help. And it's a lot of low-hanging fruit right now because these teams are just so under-resourced and over capacity that AI can make a huge impact there.
Thank you. So Jake, love to ask you a question. So you spend a lot of time helping organizations and municipalities develop frameworks to evaluate whether to deploy new technologies, whether to deploy AI in a specific use case. How would you advise, there are a lot of people who work for cities, with cities in the audience, how would you advise people at a sort of general level to think about the framework for evaluating whether to use AI?
It's a really great question. And it's important to touch on, because look, let's face it, for all the positive cases, there's obviously the undercurrent conversation of risk, right? Whether that's basic risk of your data getting leaked to an AI, to racially biased algorithmic decisions, to even the climate footprint of these things, right? All of that is swirling out here as well. And I will say, this might be a controversial take, but when we're talking with nonprofits or governments about risk assessment, we always boil it down to like two things. Because most of these groups, they've got these 15-page risk criteria, right? Is the model explainable? That's a great question. If you're a city official, how do you answer that? And if you can't, do you just say no? They're like impossible to get through these like 23 hurdles. There's no guidance on how to do them. In our experience, it comes down to two things that are really important. First is get clear on what good is. It's really tempting to come out and say, hey, we should use tech to help distribute food between food banks because it could automatically route where it's going to go. Well, how, and you can say, yeah, I can think of the time efficiency. Humans wouldn't have to do that. But like, what does good look like? If it gets distributed to places that are higher income, more disproportionately than lower income, is that okay? What if it costs 10 times as much to get it to be equitable? Like, those are not actually tech decisions. Those are like human decisions. But if we don't get clear about that, then when we see the result, we're like, damn AI, that racist crap. But we didn't get clear. Actually, a really great example of this, no shade to, shade to New York, put that chatbot out on, I think, housing advice, right? It's like, hey, we've got a chatbot, let's just put the data in, people can ask all these questions of it, and then we don't have to burden our agents to do it. And of course, people screenshotted it, giving them incredibly illegal and racist advice. Like, here's how to get your tenants of color out so that you can raise rents and stuff. It's like, oh my God, why did no one put some guardrails on that? That one's obviously bad, so we come to the second point, which is you're never going to test these things perfectly in the lab. Of course, there should be a thoughtful rollout, and that should be proportional to how dangerous the task is. Summarizing my emails is not the most high-risk thing. But the other is as these things become more human, I would say we start to test them more like we test humans. Oversight. What are the, when that happens, what are the red flags people can raise? To say, hey, this thing's giving me illegal advice. What is our own government doing to make sure that these things are operating well? And so, it's trying to squeeze this all into just a couple-minute answer. What I'd say is a lot of the stuff that's really hard about the risk trade-offs of tech are actually just about us getting more clear on what good looks like, and then making sure that we're testing that it is doing what we asked it to do. And the one piece I'll say that's implicit in all that is that in order to even figure that out, you got to have some place to experiment. And so a lot of cities are going to be like, we have to wait till we have an AI policy, or it has to be perfect. And what we've seen from groups we've worked with is, yes, put up some red lines, but then you're going to need to play in safe environments to even know what you want your policy to be. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And as people have asked those two sort of buckets of questions that you just laid out, are there general guardrails that you've seen that tend to work well? Shannon, curious if you've seen that as well.
Do you have something you want to start with?
For
Please.
sure. I can be really brief and tactical about guardrails you can look for and ones that we're putting in place with Chief. So one is who has access to your data. As a city, as a customer, can third-party AI models like OpenAI or Anthropic, can they train on your data? And there's pretty strict guardrails that you can put in place with policy to say, no, all city data cannot be used to train third-party models. Clear point, line in the sand. A second one is there's a responsibility on the product. So as we think about as we're building product to serve like non-technical users, there can be small nudges of, hey, reminder, this was generated with AI. For the output, for the suggestions, double check this before you act on this information. On the product, there's a responsibility to take action there. And then on the flip side, you also need training for your teams and for your employees to say, okay, make sure that you're checking AI-generated output to make sure it's accurate before you act on it. And I think those are three really clear things that you can do. And a lot of cities are trying to figure this out right now. We've been partnering with cities to say, how can we help you write your AI policies? Those risk assessments, we just went through one that was almost 70 questions, right, of what will happen at every single point. And it's important. We need security operations manuals. We need principles and practices. But you also just need to work in partnership with the cities to figure out how there's a responsibility on both sides to say, let's put the right guardrails in place so that we can actually use this technology.
Jake, any other thoughts?
Plus one to those, and this one's a little more radical, but I'd say if you're going to roll something out, like put a button in front of the people, the constituents, anyone that this tool represents that just says, I don't want to use AI for this. Or, hey, I think this is wrong. There's a longer rant on this, but like, I was boring the panelists, waxing nostalgic about the good old days of 3 years ago when we used to have these conferences and everyone would be like, yeah, inclusive design for tech, design with, not for. We've got communities working to build tech. And then generative AI came out and it's like, ooh, but what is this? Let's go back to the old ways. So keep pulling on that thread, you know, and that's one of the simplest hacks I know of is to Shannon's point about this was AI generated. How about a little button that's like, no thanks, or I don't think this works. Even that will go a really long way.
I love that button idea. And as you said, I guess that button is constituent facing. The other side of it, and an area that a lot of people think about, is AI has the potential to replace a fair amount of human labor. How do you, but you can't really deploy AI to try to do that and then enable the city worker to click a button and say, no, I don't want AI to do my job. I want to keep doing my job. While that obviously is an interest that we all have. So Shannon, I'd be curious if you've thought about this, and how do we make certain that AI is deployed in an ethical way when it comes to displacing or not human labor?
Definitely. I think one of the fears we still continue to hear from city leaders or from the employees is AI going to replace my job? I'm sure all of you have heard that working in your fields. And for us who sit in San Francisco building AI, I think people forget that there is still that fear across the country. And it's really important to remember that we are building to empower people, not to replace them. And I think that's especially true in government where teams are already under-resourced. I hear oftentimes it's not, oh, I want to replace our scheduler. It's I need 3 schedulers. I need her to be, or him to be working on more strategic priorities and not just having to go through and do like this clerical work. So how can you actually use AI to give people more empowerment in their jobs? When I was talking to some of the teams in DC, a lot of them were like, oh my gosh, if I had this tool, this would make this the hottest job in Washington. Like I would actually get to feel empowered in my job, work on strategic work, and the director of scheduling role would be incredibly empowered. And so that's the feeling that you want to have for people, that they're getting tools to help them do their jobs better, not to replace them.
I don't usually play the fearmonger role, but I would respectfully push back on that a bit.
Please do.
That is the party line that we are all following. With humans in the loop always, empower people, especially in the social sector, right? We're like, we don't, when we think of job replacement, you think of these evil corporations saving a buck, but my foundation's not going to replace people, and we're not going to do that. But for provocation, there was an article not that long ago that ChatGPT is outperforming doctors at diagnosis even doctors using ChatGPT. If that trend remains, at what point is it unethical to staff humans? I mean, the same could be said of teachers. If a student has a better outcome with an AI agent, is it better to serve a teacher's job or the student outcome? Like, as a social sector and government, I think we have to prepare for that eventuality. I don't know what the answer is, unfortunately, but I think that's probably where we're headed. So we need to think a lot about what to do with that. Oh yeah, please, do you have a thought on that?
I do. I think, to your point, I completely agree. Like, as if AI is outpacing what humans can do on a specific task, then it is more in our interest to have AI complete that task. But then it's also on us to say, great, so how can we actually use humans in a way that they are more empowered to do different work and help them get to that place where they're doing that different work that is more strategic, that is more fulfilling. And I think that's where AI has actually a huge opportunity to say your work will be more fulfilling now.
But we've had industrial revolutions before. We're living on the other side of an industrial revolution that had that promise. And like, how many people don't have jobs or aren't fulfilled? Like, we fill the time with more things. The power inequity isn't going to go away on its own. So I would love that world. I just think we're going to face a lot of, like, it's not going to happen overnight. AI is going to happen overnight, and like job retraining, restructuring society isn't going to, and people are going to struggle.
Then that's the future we need to be building toward.
Yeah, I agree. Government, come on, let's help us out.
It also raises some interesting questions around what metrics we're using to track, right? If AI is performing better with students when it comes than a teacher is, are there other metrics that clearly there's a benefit? I would think there's clearly a benefit to having a human teacher teach students. And if we're not able to measure what exactly that benefit is right now, it raises some questions about our measurement tools in addition to the AI versus human question.
I do like that. I will say one last thing, sorry to hog, because it's true. Can't just be about efficiency. I don't like ending on a negative note, so I want to give one glimmer of hope, which is, if you look at the jobs, think, where is job replacement actually job fulfillment with AI? Because if you look at what AI can do today, a lot of the kind of white collar stuff, finance, writing, data, coding, that's the stuff that in the nonprofit and government sector, we have to beg, borrow, and steal for. I started a X Without Borders because we couldn't get technologists, so people had to volunteer their time. I think there could be a great leveling where nonprofits and governments, who people keep saying have to work more like business, could actually have those teams for $20 a month, and that could be a change and re-leveling. No, those jobs are sitting empty anyway. Yeah. So that's one positive.
Well, Jake, building on your point about having a positive note, I would love to hear if you guys have seen really great use cases of cities that thus far have started using AI.
Sure. It's interesting. As I think about this question, I think about cities in the U.S., but I've also traveled to cities outside the U.S. to try and understand and learn about their government technology intersection and what they're doing. And a classic example is Singapore. And one of the things that they do is they know every single tree that is planted in their country, and they can track it, and they know where it is. And so that's like the most extreme version of what is your smart city. Like, we know where every tree is. I don't think that that's necessarily where we need to get, but it's pretty incredible to see what's possible with technology. So if you then bring that back to US cities and the real challenges we're facing, how can you take this technology and really tackle things that are making people struggle? So permitting applications is one that a ton of people are trying to tackle right now. There's so many companies popping up in the permitting space to say, this is causing months of backlog. It's preventing us from building the right housing. It's preventing us from having our citizens interact in the way that they need. How can we actually tackle permitting? And that's one example, and there's a lot of cities working on that right now.
I'll just be very quick because I like the kind of like shortest path from off the shelf to practical, like that Decodable Books example. So the one, like, I've only seen a few agencies do this. Maybe their AI policies won't let them. Language translation is like such an unlock that I don't see people using. The New York City government has to put things out in the top 12 most spoken languages in New York. They have to hire so many translators to put that policies out. They have to translate into Yiddish. I don't know how many Yiddish translators there are out there, but as a son of Polish Jews, it makes me happy to see that on the list. But that takes a lot of effort. And now a lot of these tools are very good at translation. Do you want a human to review it? Absolutely. But it's a lot easier to review and check than to generate. So I think I've seen a few agencies doing that. I think that's like a total unlock.
Yeah. So final question to you both before we open it up to you all for questions from the audience is, we talked about use cases today, but thinking ahead 10 years, let's say it's 2035, what do you think an inspiring vision for how cities are using AI looks like?
This wasn't on our question list.
You want to take that one?
No.
I can say something. I think for me, it comes back to rebuilding trust. And if you have an integrated system where a resident could reach out to their city on any issue and get a response, and then on the other side, you have a city leader who can understand what their residents care about and deliver on their priorities and goals, and then communicate that, like be accountable to what they were elected for and be transparent, then you actually start to rebuild trust. And I think with AI, we have a chance to create that integration and actually make our cities a lot more effective and serve our communities better.
Not even a joke. That is along the lines of what I would have said. I love that for cities. I guess one other would be I'd love to see like rapid response and innovation. You know, right now, if there is an opportunity, like the reason we have to have panels like this is there are a lot of cities like, what could AI do for me? I want to live in a world where like when a pandemic hits, we're like, all right, we may not have exactly the right tool right now, but we know who to talk to. We got them together. You know, these government agencies do this. These companies do this. These not. Great. We've provably reduced you know, bad health outcomes. I want to see that kind of rapid response. That would make me very excited.
Yeah, love that. Okay, who's got questions for our panelists? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Let me.
I would like to know, like, about the AI and dashboard. Like, what will be done to protect people's privacy of AI?
Well, and what kind of threats are you most worried about from the privacy front?
I'm worried about, like, what will be done to make sure that when there's data on everything, that people's whereabouts are protected and that individuals are not directly identified.
Great question. What will be done about that, Shannon?
Well, one of the things that I think about a lot when I'm building for the public sector versus the private sector is the additional security and compliance that is required there and the additional level of trust. Because when you are a municipality, you serve every resident, whether they opt into that or not. And when you are a private sector company, you serve the residents that come and purchase your service or your product. And so when you are a public sector entity, I think that this is incredibly important to think about. And one of the things that we do is we build products differently with that sense of security to say, how are we making sure that all data is stored for, if you're in the United States, for example, in the United States, who has access to that data? Where are the guardrails that we've put in place to say which employees can access it and which can't? Like, what are those tiered levels of access and role-based access control? So I think that's a really important part of it on the security side. And then it comes back to policy as well. A lot of cities are grappling with right now, like, what AI policies do we put in place? And it's that risk versus innovation scale that people are trying to figure out. But at the end of the day, I think residents, in order to have trust in these systems, need to know their data is secure and private, and that's where we'll need to land.
Thanks, Shannon. Next question. Yes.
Hi. We had talked you guys had talked earlier about not replacing people, but enhancing it to help people, which is awesome. But there's coming a point where we are going to have those difficulties. Are we using the community themselves to help build some of this AI? And how is that helping? Because I can see where that would be an opportunity. And then what do we do when we get there? Are we going to create jobs for people who may not have the skills right now to be able to participate in that AI process so that it's growing? Because we know we're going to grow some people out. What is the policies or the things that we're doing to ensure that people will still have some kind of income coming in and, you know, a job or something like that? What are some of the things that you guys are thinking about?
Love that question. I don't think we're seeing enough of this, but there is sort of groundswell movements of communities starting to, you know, build with this technology themselves. This is not here in New York City, but I recently heard a talk from a Native American group that was concerned about the way that, you know, these AI language models were going to be used against them, didn't represent their work. So they got together and they, with the help of, you know, some technologists in their community, built their own language model for their own language in their own way. All data stayed within the community. I think we're going to see a lot more homegrown things like that. But I do think it's incumbent on government or the public sector to help make some of that possible, because it's not, you can't just foist that task on the community, go become a tech company. Meanwhile, OpenAI is going to come in and just do whatever. So I think that's a place that the government and the public sector can help. And on the training front, I know we work with a lot of workforce training groups. I mean, this is a moving frontier, but I know that groups like Pursuit here in New York City are doing great work training folks on this like new era of data and AI. And again, it's a moving target. So they have this really active community. After you learn their lessons, you get plugged in with them and their technologists. And they're talking every day about all the different skills they need. What do employers want? I mean, that's one of the big challenges right now is employers are not saying what the new roles are that they need. There's all this talk in the air about, entry-level jobs are gone, or Salesforce isn't going to hire software engineers anymore. But, they are the demand side. So we're not sure what they're saying they need. But at the meantime, these organizations are trying to stay at that front end of skills training, especially with, oftentimes first-generation college grads, people in underrepresented communities, to get the skills to hopefully be ready for that. So I'd also look at groups like Pursuit, Basta, I'm speaking for New York here. I'm sure there are others across that are doing work like that. But more to be done. I love that vision.
One quick example is the city of Denver organized an AI summit last year. And one of the goals was to bring companies or technologists in Denver and in Colorado together to say, what could you build to serve our communities? And how can we actually pay you for pilot partners to do that, pilot partnerships to do that? How can we think through the education and apprenticeship piece of this as well in our schools and try and connect all those dots? So I think cities can be conveners oftentimes. And if you're able to convene and then take action on what you're saying and actually invest in the companies that are in your community who are doing this, that also becomes an effective way to bring people along.
Who else has a question? Wow, all right, you're going to make me run. We have time for one more after this, so think of your final question.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Jake. I mean, you raise very important points in terms of guardrails and the ability to respond back to it. There's a Latin phrase that says, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, which means, literally translated, who will guard the guards? You talked about guardrails. There's limited skill set on identifying how AI can work, right? So we are either go to a self-policing mechanism, or we end up in a place where there's so much of control, we end up in a police state. How do we address that concern?
I mean, with the caveat that I'm just one guy who doesn't know how to fight a full police state, I will say you're absolutely right that AI knowledge, knowing what AI can be used for and how to police it is lacking in terms of literacy. Little self-promotion, I'd say a little bit of what we're trying to do at Decoded Futures is rebalance that scale a bit. Say, what if the nonprofit sector, what if the public knew not just how to use these tools, but to build them themselves? Could they, hypothetically, I'm not endorsing this if this is on the record, could you have an AI go through and scrub the words the federal government no longer wants to see in there while keeping the meaning of your mission, if you will? What are some acts like that? Can we tell when an AI isn't working? So I think something governments and the public sector can help with a ton is raising that agency gap. I know as a software engineer, vibe coding is going to be a mess. If you don't know what that is, it's sort of just the fact that even if you don't know how to code, because these new tools speak English, you can kind of just describe to them what you want and start building these little mutant pieces of software. But I think that will be more empowering. People start saying, I don't want to use Facebook. That's a bad example. But I'm going to modify stuff however I want. So I think that's one version. At the end of the day, I am not a government official, so I don't know how to speak to the values of the people in power and how to check them in ways that is smart or might not get me in trouble. So I will just say more smarts is probably for the best.
The one thing I'll add is, as much as there is a risk around reaching that point, I think there's also an equal risk of the public sector not embracing technology and being behind on this, because to your point about vibe coding, people are going to start building these technologies. It is going to happen. It's inevitable. And so we have to be prepared to actually understand what are the structures we're putting in place. If you're looking at the US, as a country, as a nation, how are we approaching this technology? How are we thinking about the large language models that we have here versus the models that are in other nations? And what are the values and the ethics and the policies of those? And those are really big questions that if we just take fear and say, actually, we're just not going to embrace this right now, we're going to slow roll it, I actually think there's a greater risk of the US being outpaced and also the public sector falling so far behind the private sector that we're doing a disservice to our citizens.
Thank you. Final question from the audience before we wrap up. Yes.
Thanks, Harrison. So my question is, I love this panel because you all represent different sectors, and I'm curious what, from your perspective, would be the one biggest ask that you would make to someone from venture, from philanthropy, from government, from the private sector, with your own hat on? What would be the most important thing that someone could do in the next 6 months to advance your goals?
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think that experimentation space is super critical. We frankly don't know all the ways that AI can be applied to these problems or what those guardrails should look like for a lot of problems. So we need places for government officials, nonprofits, technologists to come together and actually do that work. So I would say venture capital, take some of that money and put it towards those efforts. It's gonna, hey, you're gonna get good products out of it as well, right? Win-win. Governments, foundations, I'd say put towards that. That has, throughout these many tech cycles that I've had a chance to witness, that has been the biggest important point for balancing the tide in terms of like cities and people feeling empowered by the technology versus oppressed by it. And by the way, we've never done a great job at that. We've never gotten to the point where we're like triumphing, but I think that's shown progress, and that's what I'd say. Give to those sandboxes. If only someone were doing that.
We did not talk about this before, and I would actually say the exact same thing. Governments need to work on pilot partnerships and actually say, yes, we are going to spend 6 months testing this out. And even though it might not be top of mind or it might feel like a longer term risk, there are so many creative ways to do this, and you can partner with the private sector on that. And I think that that is how government will start to become more comfortable and see what works for them, especially in products that are built for government rather than just general purpose. There's a lot out there, and the procurement process is pretty slow. So finding those creative ways within your city to say, we'll pilot with you, is actually going to have a huge impact, the same way that Jake was talking about with experimentation.
And with my venture capital hat on, my answer is also very similar, which is I would ask government and entrepreneurs of early stage companies to be interacting more, coming to conferences like this and chatting with one another to understand what their needs are, what their wants are, what their requirements are, working on pilot programs, but basically just bringing down the barriers to communication between early stage companies and government so that both can understand one another's needs better. So that is a great note to end on. Shannon, thank you so much. Jake, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.